Hey folks, BlackCross here, and welcome to another video game review, guys. Today's review is going to be probably one of the more interesting games that I have played this year, and that's saying something, because of me playing Elden Ring and a handful of other games here and there. But this one is different. This one is more based on looks and performance than anything. So, without further ado, here is my review of Lost in Random. So, let me just go ahead and say this right now. When looking at Lost in Random, I had a thought process of what it looks like. And it almost looks like a Tim Burton meets Lacan Productions. As if they were like fused together into a mishmash ideal and you created something random. Thus, Lost in Random. And it looks really interesting, it looks really good, so I thought to myself, I was like, I definitely want to play this, and so I finally got around to purchasing it and playing it. So what do I think of Lost in Random? This was really good. This was really good. This is one of those things where it's like, not a lot of people are talking about it right now, and it's a crime that no one's talking about it. Seriously, in all honesty, this needs to be talked about a little bit more, because in terms of the scope of everything, in terms of the story, and in terms of the combat, it's really good. It's really spot on. I was really impressed by how well it was made. It's one of those things where I'm like, I'm actually impressed with this company. I'm impressed with how they were able to make this work, you know? Because one of those things, since this is an indie game technically, it's one of those things where any type of surpassive game that does well in terms of like overall is a well accomplishment in my personal opinion, you know? Most indie games are generic, some of them are simplistic, some of them are relatively short. But this one is not only lengthy, but it's also creative in the sense of like where it pushed the design to and stuff like that. And it all flows really well, actually. It works really, really well. I was very impressed with the overall scope, design, as well as the collaboration of the overall gameplay. So, admittedly, coming up with a new world is a challenging thing to do. Because when you come up with a whole new world perspective, you have to come up with a theme, you have to come up with rules that works with that world, so on and so forth. So everything kind of works into that tension of creating a new world. We don't think of this until you see this design known as Lost in Random. And so the reason why it's called Lost in Random is because your character, Even, is trying to get to her sister who has been taken by the Queen of Random. The world that you live in is called Random, and thus she is lost in random, obviously, going through the 6 realms of random. Each realm has a number-sided die to it. You are a oneer. So then you have to go into the next area, which is 2-side town. The next one is, I believe it's called, I forgot what it is, but it's like 3. And you have to deal with like the 3 siblings. The next one is Forberg, which involves a 4-sided die ringleader and stuff like that. It works in a theme for each individual realm, and they work really well, surprisingly. Like, I have to say, I was very impressed with the overall scope of how it was made. While the design was very incredible and very creative in my personal opinion, the gameplay was solid. So the gameplay plays on a few levels of intention. Number 1, you have to collect dice energy to where you can build up a deck of hand cards. A total of 5 different cards get dealt to you, which each deck that you have, which you only have 1 deck, is a total of 15 cards. So in other words, any random 5 cards get handed to you every single time you build up your dice energy. You throw dicey, and early on you can only roll up to 2. So in other words, 1 to 2 card plays. So in other words, depending on the number of the card, depends on what you're able to use. But there's so many different cards that really, it plays out like a really interesting strategy game. Like, there's so many things. You have different weapons that you can use. There's different environments that you can use. There's different forms of bombs and poison projectiles that you can use. There's so many different things that either help or make the game more interesting in terms of combat. I was very impressed by not only the card typing, but also the advantages that each card has in terms of its usage. And I was very impressed by the overall scope and design. And really, you have no weapons, except for like this little slingshot thing, which really doesn't damage the enemy, it more or less ricochets them. But they have little crystals popping out of them, and if you shoot those, they drop dice energy. Which, of course, if you get near them, so long as you have Dicey on your back or something like that, or you can send out Dicey to collect them, which is a cool thing to see, you can do that. You build up the dice energy, and then eventually you build up to a point where you collect up to 5 cards, and then you get to throw Dicey, and depending on the number that you get, you can see what type of cards you can play. Now obviously early on it becomes harder to try to figure out, but as you go further and further and further into different realms and increase Dicey overall number count, it becomes more, what's the word I'm looking for? It becomes more manageable is the word I should say, manageable. Because while yes, it does make it feel a little bit easier, it's more towards what type of cards you can use loosely, you know? But there are other cards that you can use that help you with this. Like there's a card that gives you an extra number increase to where you can summon up better cards through your hands, or more cards for that matter. You can even do combo moves. Like there's actually a card that reduces the number on the card number itself. So in other words, where this one card, which basically is like a giant mace, which costs 3 points, but if you use this other one, which reduces all other cards, it reduces it down to 2 points. So in other words, you can use it, and depending on your role, of course, and depending on how much you've got built all together, you can actually make combo moves to help you in terms of either healing, in terms of making the enemies weaker, or giving you an advantage point in terms of weapons and stuff. The list goes on. The combat is so interesting and so well done in my personal opinion that I feel like this is an accomplishment. This is almost like Square Enix level of creative gameplay, you know? Like this kind of reminds me of Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories, but a lot more interesting in all honesty. Like, you know, obviously the card deck system is very basis in Chain of Memories and stuff, but this one was really unique. Like I was very surprised by how well this was managed. It's one of those things where I'm just like, wow. They really done well. They done well with the combat. But that doesn't stop there. One other thing that I want to mention, and it's probably one of the things that literally told me they made the best game ever. Now, admittedly, yes, I will get what people are saying. This is kind of weird for me to say this, but this is a multi-level build of a game, you know? You have a world, you have a combat, but then you have obstacles, you know? Now, it's one thing to run into an area where there's enemies that shows up and stuff like that, and you have to stop the enemy and stuff. That's one thing. It's another thing when you create a individual game using everything around the board itself. The theming of the world, the combat that plays out, works in tandem with this board game. You first encounter these in Two-Side Town. And while that may be interesting, that board was just the first level of like what you could get yourself into. As you go further into other parts of the realms and stuff, you encounter different board games. And the way these things works is that as you're doing in combat, you're throwing the dice, and depending on the number that you land on, depends on the number of paces that little piece moves to. And so you have to get to the overall goal in order to reach the end. Now there's actually a couple of instances that I've encountered where this isn't the case. This is something completely different. And it's one of those things where it's like, they literally thought of everything. They created a game within a game within a game. It's weird, but it works. It works so well in my personal opinion. They built this concept of random dice rules, and they built on it. It's like a very creative and a very fun D&D game. Like, I don't know why, but it feels so fun and entertaining. I was so blown away by overall arching design that they have done. Like, this is a creative design. No one's done this and no one's talking about this? This is insane. Like, seriously, in all honesty, in my personal opinion, this is almost a perfect 10 game. But, obviously, being an indie game, you're gonna have a few problems. And really, the only problem that I have with this game is his loading times. His loading times tend to be a little bit glitchy at times, especially when transitioning from one area to the next and you have that loading screen and everything pops up a little weird. But in terms of in-game, it isn't interfered at all. In fact, if nothing else, the in-game plays out perfectly in my personal opinion. So it's one of those things where it's like, it does well in terms of performance, and it does well in terms of the overall arching theme that has created itself. And I am just so baffled that no one's talking about this. Seriously, in all honesty, I really want more people to play through Lost in Random. If you ever get a chance, you definitely need to play this. My only critique, and obviously, as you can imagine, it's only available digitally, so there's no physical copy out there of Lost in Random. You'll have to download it. I believe it's also available on other platforms, don't quote me on this, but I've got mine from the PlayStation Store, obviously, as you can imagine. But, overall, I probably want to give Lost at Random a 4 out of 5. This is one of those things where this is a creative game that should not be missed. Admittedly, the gimmick that the game has may turn off one or two people depending, but if you're the type of gamer who tends to get into any game depending, you might actually enjoy this. The graphic design that it has, the combat gameplay that it has, the story, everything about this literally is entertaining and fun. And the best way to explain it is pure random. Like, that's probably the best way to describe it, is pure randomness. There's so many surprises that comes out of this game that honestly, it was a joy just to play through it, you know? It felt like an RPG, but it's not really an RPG. It felt like a strategy game more than anything. But it was so fun and entertaining just to play through the game and explore the world and explore the gameplay. This was so unique. And I hope to see more unique titles coming from this company. Like, I'm gonna try to remember the name of the company from here on out to where I can look out for games that this company might push out. And let me just say, that is a compliment. So, continue to do this, guys. This was a good one. I highly recommend continuing on the design scope as well as the world building that you have created to continue on to other games as well. This was a really good one. This was a good treat in my personal opinion, and I really loved it. So anyway, guys, that is my review of Lost in Random. I hope you enjoyed it, and I shall see you in the next video. This is BlackCross signing off. Catch you guys later.
My robots will reduce your steam to gelatin, leaving nothing but a gleaming white...
If that rhymes with deadly, give me